And okay, our next presenter is Father Thomas Keller. And Father Tom, he just, I met him this year when he was doing research with Sarah on the Wiggins Ferry Company. And I have to admit, I'm currently working on a project involving Wiggins Ferry tangentially for the Ohio and Mississippi Railroad here in St. Louis for the B&O Railroad Historical Society. So I perked up when Father Tom mentioned his topic. And he's been here a few times at the library. And in the course of this, we talked to him about joining us today to talk about his research. And I think you're going to find this interesting. Wiggins Ferry is probably one of the most interesting waterways transportation companies you may have never heard of, and has such a long historical impact for its size that it is fascinating. So I'm going to hand it off now to Father Tom. And I'm going to pin you now. I think you are, no, not yet. Let me make you the co-host. Okay. Nope, that's not working now either.
I'm here if you can hear me.
Oh, Father Tom, you're muted too.
Oh, I got to stop that. Oh, I shouldn't be muted.
Let me try this.
I am here if you can hear me.
We can hear.
Can you hear me?
I can
we
hear.
Can, stop that.
I can hear Tom.
Okay, we can hear Tom. There we go.
Okay. I'm not sure if my screen is up though.
It's up.
Say we see you.
I see you, Tom.
Okay. On
All
the
right.
main screen?
Yep, you are good.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks. That was a great introduction because maybe that's a good description of the Wiggins Ferry Company, maybe the most important and most influential steamboat company you've probably never heard of. That I like that description, and certainly want to be great. I am certainly grateful to the Mercantile Library, to Sarah and to Nick for helping me with some research. I'm going to share a screen if I can do that. Let's do that. How about that? Has that brought that up to everybody?
You are good. Yeah, we're seeing the screen.
The old Monopoly. That was the nickname that it was given, at least in the newspapers. Before the Eads Bridge. You have to ask yourself, how did people get across the river before that big Eads Bridge? First, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a Catholic priest, priest of the Archdiocese of St. Louis, ordained in '97. I've had a number of assignments in the Archdiocese. I'm currently the pastor of Assumption Parish in South County, sometimes known as Assumption Matisse. Matisse must have been a place at one time, and it's not anymore. We're just part of South County. We're right near Concord, which is still kind of a place, but not much. I've been interested in Western River history since childhood. There's a great story that I can't give you all the whole story because it takes a little long, but in the end, I stowed away when I was about 12 years old with my parents on the Mississippi Queen, which used to be a big cruise ship steamboat on the Mississippi, and it was easy to stow away. So next year we did the Delta Queen, and we did that for a number of years till they started expecting us to get on the boat at that time, and all had to do with getting on the boat down at the Bus and Quarry area. They would let VIP folks on and take them downtown on the 4th of July for what they called the Great Steamboat Race. And when they let VIP people on, we just snuck right on with them. And that's kind of how it all started. I love to build things. And so I build model steamboats. I've been building model steamboats since I was a kid. That's a couple of them right there, 3 of them. I've certainly built more of them over the years than that. I build them from scratch. There's no plans, because generally there are no plans for those boats. There's a few naval architects who've kind of rendered some plans, and there are a few that have survived from maybe the Howard steamboat yards in Jeffersonville, Indiana. But for the most part, there just aren't any. So I use photographs. I look at photographs of steamboats all the time in order to see the details and try to get the perspective and try to get the size of things right. And so if I'm not doing pastoral work stuff or family stuff, I'm usually working away in a little room in the rectory I call the boat yard. And I've got a couple of different boat projects going on at a time right now. And so, like I said, you got to look at photographs, lots of photographs. Now, these aren't particularly good photographs to build a steamboat from, but they are different views of our downtown levee, St. Louis levee riverfront. And it's three different periods in history, but as you're looking at these boats, usually you're looking at the big packet boats or the excursion boats, and you're saying, oh, look at those, big ornate boats or whatever. What you don't realize is that in each one of those photographs, there are ferry boats just in the distance, and you almost never notice them. They're always Wiggins ferries. If it's an image of downtown St. Louis, it is always a Wiggins ferry. They had a monopoly there. I don't know if you can see on the big picture on the left, there's two boats out in the river. Both of those are Wiggins ferries. One is a wagon ferry, and then the one further back is a train transfer or a car transfer ferry. On the right, you can see the president under construction, probably, so that makes that about 1932 or 33 or so, probably late 32. And in the background behind that is a boat called the Julius S. Walsh. That's the last of the Wiggins ferries, and it's probably abandoned at that point, but it's there. And then down at the bottom is yet another Wiggins ferry. I'm not sure which one that is, but it wouldn't be anything but that there. Talking about the Julius S. Walsh, the reason why I got into the Wiggins Ferry Company history is because during the lockdown, right, 2 weeks to slow the spread, remember that? I thought, well, I'll build a boat, a little simple boat, and I'll say I built that during the 2 weeks to stop the spread. Well, it took longer than that, and I knew it would, but I got it started during those 2 weeks. And that's the last of these Wiggins ferries. That's like the 40-something boat that they built. And that's incredible if you think about a steamboat company. The average steamboat company in at any point in the history of the river was generally just a one-boat operation. Some of these lines, the Lee line, the Anchor line, Diamond Joe line, maybe they were running 4 boats at a time, or maybe sometimes a few more or a few less, but 1 or 2, 3 or 4, a 6-boat operation is a huge operation on the river, and there are very few steamboat companies that probably ever got to that many. But the Wiggins Company was operating, 4, 5, 6, 7 boats at a time, and successively, year after year, decade after decade, for about 100 years. That's a pretty amazing feat. And also, if you think about it, if you're from St. Louis, you just never think about ferries in St. Louis. You just don't. You think about crossing the river, you think about that Eads Bridge. Somebody hated that company and didn't want them around when they were gone. You wanted to forget them once they were gone. As I researched this company, I found out, well, it's been around a long time, and there's a lot of neat stories connected to it. I can't tell you all the stories in the time I got, but we could just talk about its chronological narrative. It starts in 1795 or so. And it's still there just barely, with the ferries kind of rotting on the levee by 1930. That's a really long time for any company, much less a company on the Mississippi, which tended not to be a long-lasting enterprise, usually as long as a boat or two lasted, and then the captain either made enough money to retire or he was broke because it didn't work and he never came back. We could talk about, and this is a really interesting topic, about something called Bloody Island, which used to be right in the middle of the river, right in front of St. Louis, and it threatened to cut St. Louis off from the river, and the river would have went straight down what's now, it would have cut a new channel straight through what's now East St. Louis, and St. Louis would have lost its influence because it wouldn't be in the right spot anymore, and all the infrastructure would be too far from the river. Maybe it could have rebounded by building in a new spot. Maybe it just would have been like, you know, some other of these towns that just wouldn't have thrived. Maybe Alton would be the main city in the area. We don't know. But Bloody Island is connected to the Illinois mainland because of a guy named Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee, but who paid to build the dikes and the wing dams and everything? Wiggins Ferry Boat Company, because the federal government wouldn't pay. Missouri couldn't get their act together to pay. Illinois didn't want to pay, so Wiggins paid to connect Bloody Island to the mainland of Illinois, and it was advantageous for them to do that. We could certainly talk about all the ferries they ran during the golden age of steamboating, and one of their ferries became an ironclad and was involved with action in the Civil War down in the South. There's a lot of stories about individual boats. One of them blows up right there on the levee, and we could talk about a bunch of things. We could talk about the Great Flood of 1844, which makes the memory of our 1993 flood look like nothing. We always think that was the biggest, but it was not anywhere close. The one in 1844 was bigger. We really could talk, and be really interesting to talk more about the monopoly that existed, and we'll talk a little bit about it, and the competition, which often they would run off with carrying guns and stuff. They would go barging into the offices of competition and seize their property. So the Wiggins people, they didn't take prisoners, so to speak, because most of them were super powerful people. They were they were not steamboat people. The Wiggins Ferry Company was not steamboat people. It was powerful politicians, powerful bankers, powerful investors, real estate people. That's what made up the board of directors. They rarely had a steamboat person do anything other than the general operations of the company. Later, when the railroads became powerful, railroad people were on the ferry company board. And of course, there's the great story between Wiggins and the bridges, the Eads Bridge, Merchants Bridge, and eventually the Free Bridge that became what we call the MacArthur Bridge. Is that right? That was a huge threat to the Wiggins Ferry Boat Company, and obviously the bridges are going to win in the end, but not the way that anybody thought they were. What we're going to talk a little bit more about is just simply that transition from ferry to rail, and how the ferry boats adapted to, or the Wiggins Company adapted to, the phenomenon of railroading to the West. While we're at it, though, we want to talk a little bit about the kinds of ferries that you would encounter, and we'll talk about them more as we go along. One is a passenger ferry. There are very few passenger ferries on the Mississippi River. Not important to get people across the river as it is freight. But there are folks that would have to get from one place to the other. Up that top picture is one of the few passenger ferries that Wiggins ever operated, and of course they operated it directly against the Eads Bridge. We'll talk about that a little more later. The middle photo is a wagon ferry. If you can see that, that's a great big wide deck with a small superstructure that actually covers the engines the boilers, and the paddle wheel, which are in the middle of the boat. We'll see that a little closer a little later. And they would just roll wagons right on one side and right off the other, similar to the way we would see that happen today on automobile ferries. But in addition to wagons, the Wiggins folks had an army of laborers who would also be loading freight on those boats. And so the wagon ferry, or later the automobile ferry, that was a major part of their business. And then ultimately we see these railroad transfer boats, large steamboats with a opening right down the center of it. The boilers are pushed to the side, the wheels are pushed to the side, engines are to the, and then right in the center are those tracks right down the middle of the boat, and the trains can roll right on and roll right off, essentially. Well, they back right on and then pull right off. There'll be quite a few of those in the Wiggins history also, as well as barges that served the same purpose, and then they were pushed either by tugboats or towboats. So those transfers are sometimes called car ferries. We'll see that in a minute. Let's take a closer look at the wagon ferries. That's a closer picture. Hopefully you can see it. Eads Bridge is already built in that photo, and you can see the Great Eagle Line in the background. Those three big boats there, two of them, the two that are most visible, are part of the Eagle Line. That's where their docks were, or wharf boat was on the opposite side of the river there. The ferry is the Alonzo Church, and he was a lawyer for the company, and we'll see that lawyers play a big role in the Wiggins story. These wagon ferries have a U-shaped hull. It would make more sense to me if they were like a catamaran, like a pontoon boat, but they were U-shaped. They were the pointy part, I guess, in the front, and then the hull would split into two, and the paddle wheel would be in the middle between the two sides of the hull, and then above it would be the boilers, the engines, or in between the two sides be the boilers, the engines, the paddle wheel, all be kind of encased between the two sides there. Typically, the Wiggins and many of the other wagon ferries, they only had one smokestack, and they're kind of ungainly, pointed to one or laying to one side or the other of the pilot house. The graceful double smokestacks that you think of with a steamboat don't really you don't really find them on these wagon ferries. And then, as I said, it's meant to transport some passengers. The passengers would be up on that second deck, and the freight would be down. The wagons and the horses would all be down on that first deck. This is a really old steamboat. Probably maybe the St. Clair or the Ibex, probably one of those boats, one of the very first steamboats that Wiggins owned. But you can actually see the artist is showing the wagons are coming on and the wagons are coming off all at once there. And there's that ungainly smokestack that's still back in those days. It's 1832. That's a great photo. Shows also the more primitive design of the steamboats too, only 2 decks tall. You can see the old cathedral in the background. I'm interested in that. And probably there's a couple of other domes and steeples. One of those has to be the low, maybe the old courthouse under construction, I guess. I'm not sure. Another picture just to show you the way those boats would come up to a wharf boat with 2 great big stages that would go ashore, and then you'd have to get the horses and wagons over those stages. That's pretty typical. The Wiggins company had a number of docks like that up and down both the Illinois side and the Missouri side. Then we look at those railroad transfers a little bit more closely. I want to point out that the railroad transfers worked all the way from the 1860s on the river until the 1960s. We have a century of active rail transfers. The last ones were big ones built in Dubuque. You think of the Albatross, which becomes the Admiral. That's how big those rail transfers were getting towards the end. And then the Pelican is a similar boat to the Albatross. St. Genevieve's not built in Dubuque, but it's similar size. And both the Pelican and the St. Genevieve, they're working until the 1960s. Pelican down in Vicksburg, and then later in Helena, Arkansas, and the St. Genevieve, it's part of the St. Genevieve area there. And then there's the BF Joachim, I guess. It was in Baton Rouge. It was renamed the Willard V. King. And it came to St. Louis and moved Missouri Pacific all the way until 1940. And that was the last railroad transfer in St. Louis. It's not a Wiggins boat. Missouri Pacific never crossed the river on Wiggins ferries. We'll see that they're direct competitors, and one of the few direct competitors that they didn't find a way to suck in. Let's just do some background, right? Remember, the Mississippi represents a north-south highway. People are going up and down it, first on flat boats, then on keel boats, and then on steamboats. We get to 1764, the founding of St. Louis, and people need to cross the river east-west. But that's a formidable barrier. You just can't do that if you don't have a boat. Your wagon is not going to make it across the Mississippi. You're not going to be able to swim across the Mississippi there. And so it's a formidable barrier. Someone with a boat has to get you to get you across that river. And that's really the beginning of this ferry company. Now, in addition to just folks who want to travel west, the Southern Illinois floodplain across from St. Louis has been and continues to be an extremely fertile agricultural center. It's known as the American Bottom. We don't ever use that word in St. Louis anymore, but you see it all the time when you're reading about Wiggins, about the American Bottom. And that's representing all the farmers, and also there's coal that's found in Belleville. Believe it or not, a Trappist monk found coal in Belleville, probably in the late 1700s, when the Trappists were right there near Monk's Mound and the Cahokia Mounds. And when they found coal, eventually that coal is going to become an important part of the steamboat industry. But for the time being, if you wanted to move anything across the river, farmers, shippers, travelers, settlers, you're going to need a boat to cross the river, so you're going to need a ferry. The guy who starts the first ferry is a guy named James Pigott. Well, there's maybe a guy before that named Gamache, but Pigott's the first guy who really starts the ferry company, a ferry service. He's a captain, not like a steamboat captain. He's before steamboats, not even a boat captain. He's a captain in the Revolutionary War. He fought with General Washington at Brandywine and Saratoga. Then he's part of a post-war project to fortify the western frontier, and he builds forts basically in the Columbia, Illinois area, right across from the Jefferson Barracks Bridge here in St. Louis. He settles in the American Bottom, builds those fortifications, but he eyes St. Louis, and he realizes that it would be profitable to build a ferry service to connect the American Bottom to St. Louis. Let's see, there we go. In 1795, he begins, he begins a process of getting authorization from the Spanish governor and the Illinois legislature, which is just being formed about that time, to operate a ferry in St. Louis. Between 1795 and 97, he has to build the infrastructure, because you can't actually get to where we call East St. Louis today. It's just woodland. So he has to build the roads. He has to build a bridge over the Cahokia Creek. He has to clear the landing. He has to build support buildings. So it takes a few years. In 1797, he starts the ferry service, but they're basically just canoes, pirogues there, canoes, maybe two of them tied together with a platform between the two. You'd have to take apart a wagon. If you wanted to cross the river with a wagon, You'd have to take the wagon wheels off, the freight off, put the wagon on the ferry, which again is just two big canoes with a platform on it. They cross it, they come back to pick up your wheels and your freight or whatever, take it across, come back and take the horses. And then finally, if there's room for you somewhere, you get to go on the ferry. So you'd have to pay the ferry to cross 3 or 4 times just to get you and your wagon across the river in those days. And the river was really narrow at that time and fairly deep. And you could actually just holler from one side of the river and the ferryman would know to come over and get you. The river's different now than it was then. And we could kind of go into that more deeply, but probably don't have time. The Wiggins ferry boat company, we have to see where the name Wiggins comes from. Piggott doesn't run the company long. He dies 2 years later in 99. And then it passes from one operator to another, basically leased by the Piggott family. The Piggott widow, Mrs. Piggott, wasn't really interested in the company. Neither were the kids. They were okay if it was making money, but eventually they just decided they wanted to sell it. So a couple of people buy it. Samuel Wiggins eventually buys out those people. And about 1821, he becomes the sole owner of the ferry business and all the Wiggett property in Illinois, which eventually will turn out to be perfect for coal mines. And so they really will control the coal mining in Illinois too, or at least in the Belleville area. And then in 27, he gets the exclusive rights from the legislature to operate a ferry in St. Louis or to St. Louis. That's important because the legislature builds a 1-mile buffer north and south into the legislation so that no one can compete with them. So if he owns a spot along the river, no one can compete 1 mile south or 1 mile north. Later, they're going to expand that to 2 miles north and 2 miles south. So it's in Wiggins' interest to buy as much riverfront property as he can. Eventually, he's going to own 4 miles, and then he's got 2 more miles north and south where no one can compete. So he controls 8 miles of river opposite of downtown St. Louis. You can't get to downtown without not just downtown. At the time, downtown was the whole city, right? What we call downtown is the whole city. So you can't even get to St. Louis without paying Wiggins. If you were to take another ferry, you'd have to go down to Cahokia and then cross over to Carondelet and then come back north on Broadway. So Wiggins has this monopoly of everybody who's going to cross. Meanwhile, Bloody Island is growing. And I mentioned before, it's going to threaten to take over the river in St. Louis and cut it off. Like I said, Wiggins pays to stop that, keep the channel where it's at. And of course, they annex it. It becomes their property. So they control all the land on the Illinois side between Venice, Illinois in the north and Cahokia in the south. That's a lot of land. A lot of people who are going to want to cross the river are going to have to use them. There's a great little picture for you to think about for a minute. Look at that cute little landing. He's got a little dock. There's his little ferry boats leaving. There's a bigger packet coming up the river. You can see St. Louis has grown by the time this picture's. Now, in addition to the old cathedral and the old courthouse, we're seeing lots of church steeples, lots of buildings over there. You can see Bloody Island forming on the right side of that picture. You see that? That's kind of great fun. Little guys in canoes there doing their thing, a flatboat out there doing its thing. If you zoomed in, you'd see a lot of steamboats already. So that's probably the 1850s when that picture is taken. So let's see. I'm lost here for a second on there it is. All right. Let's just give you some logistics so you can see where they're at. So they've got landings on the Illinois side about a half mile north of where the Eads Bridge is today. Then they would cross to Morgan Street, which is a few blocks north of Eads. Then they drop down through what now would be the Eads. And there's landings on both sides of the river there. And then down to Spruce Street, which is just about where Poplar Street Bridge is today. And here's something also to remember. Wiggins isn't just a ferry boat. Wiggins owns all this property in what we call East St. Louis. In those days, it was known as Illinois Town. The roads to get to the ferry boat were toll roads that Wiggins owned. So you paid Wiggins to get to his boat. And then if you had to eat or stay overnight, they called it taverns, but they were really eating and lodging establishments.
They did the exact same thing.
They owned them too. And they owned warehouses because you may have to wait your turn to cross. So you'd have to put your stuff somewhere safe. You'd have to leave your horse with their livery yard. Maybe you need your horse after traveling, needs new shoes. They've got a blacksmith for you. And then later, all the steamboats that you see in St. Louis, all of them are being refueled by coal flats that are being brought to them by the Wiggins Ferry Boat Company. Because it's their coal. That's the easiest place to find coal in St. Louis to refuel. So you're not just, the Wiggins folks aren't just making money because they're the only way you can cross in St. Louis, but it is also all of this infrastructure that they own to make that possible. They don't actually set the rates for their boats to cross on their boats. That's set by the Illinois legislature. However, who makes up the Wiggins Ferry Boat Company? They're not steamboat people. They're bankers, politicians, judges, real estate investors, insurers, and maybe some steamboat men. And so the people who own the company, the people who are stockholders, the people who are on their board of directors, they're likely the legislators who are making the laws or setting the rates for you to cross. Now you'd say, Father Keller, that's a conflict of interest. The government can't do that, can they? And the answer is absolutely they did. In those days, there just wasn't the same awareness of conflict of interest, or at least there wasn't legislation to stop that conflict of interest. And so when you're looking at just a quick look, and most of this is because they named boats after these people. Andrew C. Christie, St. Louis councilman, Missouri senator. Samuel Christie, his son, president of the Bank of Illinois, which was bailed out by the Wiggins Company, by the way. The State Bank of Illinois went bankrupt. And so the legislature went to the Wiggins Ferry Boat Company, and Samuel Wiggins cut him a check so that they could stay in business. That's just incredible to me. I guess maybe it is to you, I don't know. This guy named Charles Mulliken, he's an insurer. And of course, what's he doing? He's insuring boats and docks, which is exactly what this company does. You got this Louis V. Bogey. He's a senator. He's also a judge. He's also president of the St. Louis Iron Mountain Railway. Henry Sackman, Illinois Railroad and Warehouse Commission. George A. Madgall, he's a circuit judge. Henry C. Harstick, president of the St. Louis and Mississippi Valley Transit Company. And then finally you get to a steamboat captain who also ran for and was mayor of St. Louis, and that's when the Eads Bridge opened. He was against the bridge before he was for it, and when he was the president of the Wiggins Ferry Boat Company, he fought against the bridge. When he was elected mayor, he was right there and ready to welcome people across on the bridge. So that old monopoly, as they called him in the newspapers, I guess a derogatory name for the Wiggins Ferry Boat Company. by 1853, they had to renew their articles of incorporation. There was tons of resistance and a lot of fun reading in newspapers about how we hate this company, etc. Everybody complains about the high rates. It costs as much to ship something from New Orleans to St. Louis as it costs to cross the river with Wiggins. Think about that for a second. It costs as much to ship something on a packet boat to St. Louis as it will to take that off the steamboat and cross to the Illinois side with it. That's incredible to me. Of course, you say, well, did they get their articles of incorporation renewed? Of course, because of all the political and financial connections at Wiggins. It was business as usual. Not only did they incorporate, but they also in about 1853 started building their own private town to house all the people that they need to work there, which is something not uncommon in the 1800s. Now we finally get to the railroads, which most of you are interested in. Now, there's no railroad picture at this point because essentially everything is taken off of the train, and the tracks come at the river perpendicular. They stop on a platform. Everything is unloaded and then put on wagons or put on hand carts, really. And then loaded down onto the wagon ferries. Everything is done by roustabouts, which are steamboat laborers. What would happen is generally African American men, maybe age 16 to 20, 25 or so, if they were unmarried generally, they would be a steamboat route. They could become a steamboat roustabout. You just go down to the levee and a mate would pick you if you looked like you could work. And you were paid per day or per trip. So if the trip was going to New Orleans, you'd be paid for the trip. You're expected to work 24 hours a day on the boat. At any point you were needed, which wasn't all 24 hours, but would be whenever somebody hailed the boat and the boat stopped in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day and something needed to be loaded or unloaded, they would call on those roustabouts to do that. The Wiggins ferry boat company, even though it didn't leave St. Louis, it basically used the same type of labor arrangement, which was people who were just picked for the work that day, or maybe they just had a steady arrangement, but they were paid like every other steamboat roustabout, which would have been very little, and the work was very hard. I've heard people say that those guys were expected to be able to lift 300 pounds on their back and carry it. That's a lot. And so the Ohio and Mississippi Railway is the first to get there, but also the St. Louis, Alton, and Terre Haute, the Belleville and St. Louis Suburban, it's called, and the Chicago and Alton railroads. They're coming in perpendicular. Everything is unloaded by roustabouts, put on wagon ferries, taken to the other side. Another set of roustabouts unload it, and then it's dispersed to wherever it's meant to go from the levee there. Of course, people hate the Wiggins Ferry Boat Company. This is a great quote. We will take stock in the bridge company if necessary, anything to free us from that nightmare ferry, which is not only a real terror, but not only a terror, but a real vampire sucking our very lifeblood. That's a farmer in 1865. And Alton Telegraph editorial says, it's doubtful whether the historic black hole of Calcutta is redundant of a more filthy and disgusting conglomeration of bad odors than that of the cabins of the St. Louis ferry boats. The boats are safe, but they ran those boats for years and years. The average life of a steamboat on the Mississippi during the golden age of steamboating would have been 3 years. These boats ran for over a decade, sometimes 2, because they're not experiencing, number one, obstacles on the river like the packet boats did, but also because the ferry boat company just ran those boats until they were just not able to run anymore, because the like for every steamboat company, the goal is to make money. But for them, there was no competition, so there was no intent, no need to get a bigger and better boat to attract more business. Their wharf boats were hazardous. There's all sorts of lawsuits, people falling in the river, no guardrails. Sometimes it's just a plank of wood that's thrown down into the mud. They really didn't care as long as you paid to get on and off. Then the landings themselves, you think about all of the trains unloading and those wagons and hand carts being quickly moved by roustabouts from place to place, you were lucky to get out without getting knocked down. So we've got the first threat in years, the Madison Ferry companies, the first real threat from 1791 to 1869. Finally, there's another ferry boat company just outside the East St. Louis or Illinois side 8-mile buffer. It's running out of Venice, Illinois, which is just outside the Wiggins territory, and it's bringing people to downtown. So the ferry ride is longer. The rates are probably about the same. They're set by the Illinois legislature. But the very fact that they're taking business from the Wiggins company is not something they're happy with. And then what makes it even worse is that they introduce a new boat that had not been used before, the railroad transfer, or sometimes called a car ferry. And there we have a picture of one right there, the Lewis V. Bogey. That's their response. In 1870, the next year, the Wiggins gets their own car ferry. So there's two, so they begin to do that. They're forced to do that. So no longer do they have to break bulk, as they say, but now they can roll those cars right onto a steamboat and move the freight. There's a great picture of an early car ferry, better than the drawing. That's actually not a Wiggins ferry. That's Missouri Pacific, and the name of the boat is the Pacific. But that's just a great picture. A lot of action in that, I guess we could say, with the train moving, guys standing on the cars, the boat waiting to leave when the train exits. By then, 1870, let's say, this is right before the Eads Bridge. The photo has the picture has the Eads Bridge, but in fact, right before the Eads Bridge, Wiggins is expanded. They still have their toll roads. They still have the hotels, everything like that. But they've added to it housing, a school, the Douglas School. They've got a Presbyterian church on their property. They've had to build a hospital because of cholera outbreaks. And they've got all these terminal warehouses for the various train companies that are terminating right there at East St. Louis. They've got the largest icing facilities for refrigerated rail cars. And of course, now they've got refueling and repair facilities for the locomotives. They've got switching facilities. They've got mills. They've got lumber yards. They've got grain elevators. That's what you're seeing there in the photo or in the picture. That's a grain elevator. They had multiple grain elevators at one time. And they were, by 1873, they've got multiple routes, both for their wagon ferries and the transfers. They're running 7 ferries for wagons and passengers. They've got 1 big railroad transfer and 3, I should say barges, not badges, sorry. And they're being pushed by tugs and towboats. They're moving 1,500 passengers a day, 750 wagons a day, and 100 train cars a day. But there's another threat. As you know, in 1873, the Eads Bridge is already under construction. You've got a character named Lucius Boomer. He's from Chicago. He proposes a plan to build a bridge across the Mississippi. But of course, St. Louisans are unhappy with his Chicago connections. They don't trust that he's going to be working in St. Louis' best interest. And everybody suspects he's in Wiggins' pocket. As a matter of fact, there's a popular story that's being told that if Lucius Boomer gets the contract, he will not build the bridge for 25 years because Wiggins bought him off to delay the project. There's no way to know if that was true, but he doesn't get the project. Your friend James Buchanan Eads gets the project. And they build right through the center of Wiggins' property. There's court cases, and eventually they get paid, but not much for the property. And the bridge opens in 1874. I think every St. Louisan believes Wiggins will be closed within a year. And if you look at the newspaper articles from that time, they're basically giving eulogies of the Wiggins company. They're giving the history of the company and saying how great it was. But it's a shame, history moves on, progress, industry. The Wiggins company is going to be in the dustpan of history. There's even one great article. I'm not sure what I did with that, but the person goes through this wonderful description of all their boats over the years. It was great because that made it easy to identify which boats were the Wiggins boats over the course of a century. But at the end, they say, too bad that the board of directors have either left the area or gone insane. They've been locked up because they're insane. And that's probably yellow journalism. They probably didn't go insane. Matter of fact, they made more money than they had ever, even after the Eads Bridge was built. Eads Bridge was built with only one gauge, whereas all the ferry boats were custom built for the companies that they were using. The approach on the east side of the bridge was really long and out of the way, and very few train companies could connect to it quickly and easily. And of course, once you got to the west side and the St. Louis side, the tunnels were toxic because they didn't ventilate the exhaust from the trains well. And so the underground stations that were designed with the Eads Bridge were unusable, and Union Depot at the time was remote and outside the city. It's basically built in Choteau's Pond, which is outside the city. And if you got off the train, there was just nothing there. Eventually they built a Union Depot there, but it's a small set of buildings, and because there really weren't that many trains using the Eads Bridge like everybody thought they would. And just to keep things interesting, the Wiggins company, now more profitable than ever, opens a little passenger ferry you see in that picture, the D.W. Hewitt. And they gave out free whiskey to patrons, and thus stealing business from the Eads Bridge. Why walk across that bridge on a hot day when the boat can take you and give you free whiskey on the side? So the bridge goes into bankruptcy, not just because of the Wiggins, but maybe because it wasn't designed in a way to be profitable. But Wiggins definitely was more profitable than ever. By 1875, the year after the bridge was built, you have the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, the Chicago, Alton, and St. Louis, the Baltimore and Ohio, the St. Louis, Vandalia, and Terre Haute, St. Louis and Nashville, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Chicago, and St. Louis, Illinois Central, Mobile, and Ohio, Louisville, and Evansville, and St. Louis consolidated. They're all there. And that's a picture, that's probably a little later than 1875, but it doesn't matter because that's probably what it looked like for a decade or so after the bridge was built. Those are all trains that'll never take that bridge, but are using the Wiggins Ferry Company to cross the river in one manner or another. I won't go through all that, but you can see that's how many railroad transfers were being used. There's 4 side wheel transfers. There's a number of tugboats pushing a transfer barge, number of stern wheel towboats moving transfer barges. You can see the times though. You got the 1874 era of 1880, which is, all this is happening after the bridge is built. 1883, 1891, 97, all those new boats are being bought or built or brought to St. Louis to compete with the bridge. The Wiggins Ferry Boat Company eventually buys the Madison, or they lease essentially the Madison Ferry Boat Company up in Venice, Illinois, and also they have a supporting railroad, and they buy them. The Wiggins Ferry Boat Company starts to become not a ferry boat company, but a railroad here. They aren't just unloading and supplying trains. They begin to buy their own locomotives and lay their own track and become their own thing. And the only company that's really competing with them is down in Cahokia and Carondelet, the Missouri Pacific, the transfers, Missouri and Pacific. They are the only competitors of Wiggins really at that period. And so this is probably a picture from 1913. There's a great flood. The only good pictures of Wiggins comes from when there's a flood. But on the Illinois side, they become a railroad, the East St. Louis Connecting Railroad. And they have tracks parallel to the river that connect all of the other train facilities. And they add their own switching yards, and everything on the east side is connected by that. And then a few years later, they connect everything on the St. Louis side with the St. Louis Transfer Railway. There's court cases going all the way to the Supreme Court about roustabouts, and are they really train employees? And if they are, there should be pensions, there should be different pay scales, etc. So Wiggins was forced to create the Wiggins Transfer Company, which is folks who move freight. And so they have to adopt railroad rules. That's a great map. Thanks to Mercantile for sharing that with me. You can see Mississippi is going from left to right. That's downriver, upriver is left, downriver right. That's East St. Louis on the top and St. Louis on the bottom. And all that dark area in the center is the Wiggins Ferry Boat Company property. And look at all the rails perpendicular to the river, and all the different companies that I just listed are found in that. The dark areas on that map are buildings that either owned by Wiggins or are on Wiggins property owned by the railroads. They were happy to sell the property to get the railroads there, as long as they kept the property right along the river so that they wouldn't have a competitor. I don't know whether you want to peek at that longer or if that's long enough. There's a ton of stuff in that. It's a great picture. Great map. Maybe we'll move on. And that's what you're seeing. That's in 1913. That's during the Great Flood. You can see water in the front. You can see water behind. The high area in between is the old Bloody Island, which is now connected to the Illinois mainland, except during a flood. And from left to right, you're looking at Wiggins, those grain elevators. You're looking at a small little ferry, the Alonzo Church. There's the kind of low to the ground there, but you see long roof lines there coming from the boats back. Those are the B&O railroad warehouses, the terminals. And then the big steamboat in the center is the George A. Maddle, which is a railroad transfer. There's a boat. If we zoom in, you'll see it. It's the Henry L. Clark. There's a transfer barge there where the trains were loaded on the transfers. Then there's a boat. I can't figure out what exactly it is. It's got to be leased by the Wiggins Ferry Boat Company, the JCM Mullen. It doesn't show up in steamboat rosters that I have access to, but I'm betting anything it was built for somewhere else and they leased it. And then above that second boat there, second railroad transfer on the right, you can see lots of blocks of buildings. And that's the remains of that company town that was still being used, although most of it had been leveled for trains over time. There's a little coal flat, and then on the far right, you see another steamboat. That is the Charles Meram, another railroad transfer. You can look at that more closely now. You see the Alonzo Church and the B&O long terminals there on the right. Then as we move along the Maddle again, and there's again, it's hard to see, but there's another boat behind it. And then the buildings there, you can probably see the school. That's the Douglas School there on the right, and then a transfer barge in the river there. And then we'll move a little further down to see that GCM Mullen boat. That's a dirty old boat. And more buildings there as part of the former town. And then way on the side there is the Charles Meram. Now we're on the other side of the river, and it is definitely not a flood. It is low river stage, really low. It's probably 1917. All those boats are probably boarded up and not being used anymore. Why are they not white like steamboats are normally? The Wiggins Company around 1890 started painting all their boats red. And I guess to make them distinct from the other steamboats on the river, I guess. Maybe because they were probably moldy and ugly looking, so they painted red iron oxide on them so that they wouldn't look so bad. They just probably looked the same color as a Missouri barn. So if we start at the bottom and go to the top of that page there, you've got coal flats and a wharf boat. Then you can see a transfer barge, and you know it's a transfer barge because it's got all of that hog chains up on top so that the boat could handle the weight of the train locomotives if they had to cross, but most likely the train cars themselves were all that they transferred. Then there's two big transfer boats, rail or car ferries. That's the George M. Maddle, again, now painted red. And then the Henry Sackman, it's got to be the Henry Sackman because all the rest of their boats were gone by 1917. And then the boat that I built, the Julius S. Walsh, that ferry boat, and then an Andrew Christie, another automobile ferry by that point. And then the white boat further up is the Mark Twain. It used to be the Erastus Wells. But then you notice there are just no boats on the levee. There would have been boats. Not sure if they have, they're just all gone when the picture is taken. Picture's probably taken from the second bridge, what's called the Free Bridge. And now what's it? Douglas Bridge, McDouglas Bridge. We can look at that a little more closely. Those boats are all shuttered. You can see the pilot houses are boarded up and everything. That's the end of the line for those, for the whole ferry company when that picture is being taken, probably. Because they have an unbeatable foe, the Terminal Railroad Association. I'm sure you've heard of it. The Terminal Railroad Association with Jay Gould. MacArthur Bridge is what I was trying to think of. That's right. Sorry about that. Jay Gould, you've probably heard of him. He founds the Terminal Railroad in 1889. He buys the Eads Bridge the same year. He's not allowed to buy the Merchants Bridge by law. He does it anyway in 1893. And then he opens Union Station in 94. That's probably a turning point for Wiggins Ferry because they've had all the infrastructure that the Eads Bridge didn't have, but now Union Station has that infrastructure for passengers and everything else. And so Union Station is probably a major turning point. But the Terminal Railroad Association continues to buy up everything. They're buying the Illinois Railroad, Illinois Transfer Railroad, the East St. Louis and Carondelet Railroad, the St. Louis Belt and Terminal Railroad. You can see in 1902 they're buying a lot of their competitors, and they want to buy the Wiggins Ferry. There is a tremendously interesting few weeks, and the newspapers are all looking at headlines about, are all posting headlines about the Wiggins Ferry. Rock Island quietly offers to buy Wiggins Ferry, the ferry boat company, and the board votes to sell their stock, giving it to Rock Island, and they start buying up stock. Letters are sent out to stockholders. Some stockholders have had this stock since the 1830s, 1820s. So it's descendants of folks who have owned that company. People who don't live in St. Louis anymore, people who live all over the country. And quietly they're buying up stock, but then it breaks news and the Terminal Railroad enters competition and stock prices soar. So Wiggins Ferry Company stock is supposed to be $100 a share. It normally sells for about $230 a share. Suddenly it's $1,500 a share. And some stockholders essentially are becoming millionaires overnight. They sell their stock and they are set. Sometimes families were fighting over whether to sell now or sell later or sell it all. And lawyers are presiding over family meetings because, you know, they're unable to make good decisions and they're etc. And a number of times the newspapers announce a winner. They say, you know, Rock Island bought the Wiggins Ferry Boat Company, or they'd say the Terminal Railroad bought the company, but they didn't. They didn't have all the stock yet. Everything comes down to a minor, a 17-year-old boy at St. Louis University whose parents had died and he had no legal guardian for some reason. And he can't sell the stock. And nobody has the majority of stock. So everything comes to a grinding halt until an out-of-court settlement later in 1903. And Rock Island sells in order to be admitted into the Terminal Railroad Association, which it had been blocked out of for years. Julius S. Walsh is the president of the Terminal Railroad Association. He now becomes the president of the ferry company, and hence he gets a ferry named after him in a few years. But at that point, all 7 ferries, 18 locomotives, 70 miles of track, 8 miles of East St. Louis riverfront property, and all the facilities all go to the Terminal Railroad Association, which is still in existence today. And if you want to move anything through St. Louis, you're probably paying Terminal Railroad something. And you might even be moving it along on existing railways that were built by Wiggins, because there's still some track today that's out there that's track that they laid. Although most of it, I think, has been replaced. Well, probably all of it's been somewhat, but the original place where it was is still being used. And so Wiggins starts to fade away. Terminal Railroad continues to operate the Wiggins boats as long as they're profitable. They even build a few more boats like the Julius S. Walsh. But basically by 1819, all those boats are retired. The transfers are all done by then. But really, those boats aren't running year-round anymore anyway. I don't think any of them were. Even the Julius S. Walsh stopped regular service probably long before 1927, but certainly by 1927, it stopped, and it's abandoned by 33, and that's a picture of it in 33. It's pretty much the end of the line for Wiggins. I do want to do one little thing and say that, and I've mentioned this before, Missouri Pacific continues to run transfers, those big boats, south from Cahokia to Carondelet, all the way to 1940. So it's not just because the Wiggins Ferry Boat Company ended, we didn't end total ferry service in St. Louis. There are even some other ferries on the Mississippi until later. But the last of the big transfer boats, the William V. King, she worked, as I said earlier, until 1940. And that's a great photo of her. As the rail cars got heavier, they had to lighten the boats. And so they pulled those great big boxes down off over the side wheels that are normal for Mississippi steamboats. So it must have been impressive to see a 3-story paddle wheel turn. And that would have been about the size of the paddle wheel that the Admiral would have had, because that boat, the Yoakum and the Albatross, are essentially sister ships. Anyway, we're coming to the end if you're still awake. I want to thank you guys and acknowledge the Mercantile Library especially. Also, I snagged photos from University of Wisconsin-Madison, Missouri Historical Society, and probably other spots on the internet. You have any questions? Anybody there?
Thanks, Father Tom.
Thanks.
We've got a couple of questions. Bradley Scott had a question about the barge. I think it was in one of the earlier slides. A barge, other object that was marked public. And I think that might have been on the Wiggins Ferry map.
Right.
In the picture of the Eads Bridge. Picture of the Eads Bridge. Okay.
Picture of the Eads Bridge. I'm looking at such tiny little pictures.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
There we go.
Those are barges coming up the river in that picture. I suspect well, I suppose so. It looks like it's going to hit the pier from this perspective. What do you think? Unfortunately, that picture, if you see on the very right edge of it, it cuts up to another photograph there, or a repetition of the first one. It's probably one of those old pictures you would have viewed through lenses that you put up against your face, like a pair of reading glasses. So that looks to me like an early barge being pushed by a towboat, but on the other hand, it just looks like it's right there in the middle of that pier. So I don't know if I can answer that question very intelligently, but it's a good question.
Yeah, that might be worth seeing if there was a barge line nickname or
Yeah.
called public barge line or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. A stereotopic, is that a stereoscopic viewer is what that is. Scary. So, but yeah. Now when we're looking at that picture, look at that, that wharf boat that Hewitt is tied up to. That little thing is precarious, and so is its ramp.
Yeah.
But you get free whiskey, so I'm sure it's worth the risk.
Yes. Take what you can get on that one.
Yeah.
Let's see. He had another question. Brad had another question about the Rock Island and the Frisco, and Renee actually answered that in the chat. Was the Rock Island affiliated with the Frisco when it started buying Wiggins stock in 1902? And they got joined together under the Yoakum Syndicate in 1905. So that's, or I can't remember when that started, but there was a period of time when the Rock and the Frisco were essentially brigaded together under a syndicate.
So I think when you and I were talking earlier this week, we talked about how the Santa Fe and the Rock Island were kind of together in a sense that I can't remember how we were. The Santa Fe was not allowed in St. Louis. Rock Island wasn't allowed in St. Louis, but it seemed like they could get that Santa Fe could sell. It was Kansas City and Colorado to Wiggins, and then Wiggins turned around and sold it to Rock Island, and Rock Island turned around and tried to buy Wiggins.
It all had to deal with getting access through a state railroad charter, and for whatever reason, Santa Fe was having trouble getting into St. Louis, and they were going to use the Rocks as a vehicle to do that. And that was at Kansas City. That railroad name you just mentioned, that was a paper railroad that became the Rock Islands, Missouri division.
Right, the St. Louis, Kansas City, and Colorado. It didn't really fully exist yet.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And then, Santa Fe opted not to pursue that at the end and went to Chicago on its own. But that is, what was that in? It was in the official history of the Rock Island, where they talk about all the machinations that became the Missouri division. So, let's see. We do have a question from John Brown.
Hey, Nick. Hey, Father Keller. Thank you for a great presentation. I'm really blown away by your research. You have done piles of research, which I know because I've done some research on the Eads Bridge. So a little nugget for you, which given your research, you probably already know. The Hewitt, which you showed, the first passenger ferry strictly dedicated for passengers, for pedestrians. The Hewitt was bought by Wiggins from St. Louis Bridge. It had been a workboat for St. Louis Bridge. And when they finished the bridge, they didn't need their workboat anymore. So Wiggins bought it and then refitted the whole thing and made it quite elegant. So there's some lovely irony that Wiggins turned this vessel around and made it a tool to beat up on the bridge company.
Well, that's interesting. I did not know that. What I know mostly about these boats come from Captain Frederick Way. Captain Fred Way in the Way's packet directory. Or sometimes I found some other stuff along the way, might have been in waterway journals or newspaper articles, but I did not know that. That's great. That's funny that they bought an old workboat that built the bridge and turned it around to compete with them.
Yep, pretty cool.
That is not surprising.
So the other question I have for you and for everyone, do I get another one?
Anyone else have any questions? We're actually after 3 o'clock. So
then I'll save it. I can correspond directly with Father Keller.
Absolutely.
all right. Well, Father Tom, thank you again for joining us again on your Saturday, just like Dave took an hour of his Saturday out to join us. We really appreciate it. And it was an excellent presentation. If folks have questions for, again, Father Tom or Dave later on, you can email me. You can email Sarah Hodge, who's the Pot Waterways curator. And again, also, we will have recordings of this presentation and my following presentation and Dave's presentation. We'll have those online via our YouTube, hopefully within the next 24 to 48 hours. So again, Father Tom, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks.
All right. And we are going to hop right on.